Most people believe they are reacting to reality, but they're actually reacting to interpretation. An event happens in the outside world, but the emotional explosion happens inside the mind. Two people can walk through the same experience and feel completely different outcomes because meaning is personal. One sees rejection as proof they're unworthy, another sees it as redirection towards something greater. The trigger is not the event itself, but the invisible story formed in seconds beneath awareness. That story carries assumptions, past wounds, expectations, and identity. When the mind assigns meaning instantly, emotions follow automatically. Anger, fear, insecurity, or motivation all come from that silent translation layer between reality and response. The moment you understand that meaning is created, not given, you begin to reclaim power over emotional chaos. You realize life is not constantly attacking you, but your interpretations are constantly shaping your experience in ways you never questioned before. Meaning is built from memories layered over time. Every childhood moment, every failure, every betrayal leaves emotional fingerprints that shape how future events are interpreted. A simple comment can feel like an attack if it echoes an old wound. A delay can feel like rejection if patience was never practiced. The brain becomes a meaning-making machine scanning present moments through the lens of the past. This is why triggers feel instant and uncontrollable, because the mind is not evaluating reality objectively, but replaying emotional patterns automatically. Most people never pause long enough to question whether the meaning is true or just familiar. They assume intensity equals accuracy. But emotional intensity often reflects history, not truth. When you slow down and examine the meaning instead of reacting to the feeling, you begin separating who you are now from what you carried before. That separation is where emotional intelligence starts to grow. The danger of unconscious meaning is how fast it shapes identity. When events are repeatedly interpreted through limiting beliefs, those meanings become self-definitions. Failure becomes I am not capable. Criticism becomes I am not enough. Silence becomes I am invisible. Over time, meanings stop being temporary reactions and start becoming permanent identities. People don't just experience triggers, they become shaped by them. They shrink their goals, silence their voice, and lower their standards because they believe their interpretations are facts. This is how potential quietly dies, not from lack of opportunity, but from misinterpreted moments that rewrite self-worth. The world may present challenges, but identity is sculpted by meaning. Once you recognize that identity is built from repeated interpretations, you begin to see how powerful it is to rewrite those meanings consciously instead of inheriting them unconsciously. Reframing meaning is where transformation begins. The same event can become fuel or friction depending on the lens applied. Rejection can be reframed as refinement, teaching clarity and standards. Failure can become feedback, pointing directly toward growth edges. Pressure can become preparation, strengthening mental endurance instead of creating anxiety. Reframing is not denial of pain, but redirection of interpretation. It is the ability to acknowledge reality while choosing an empowering meaning that builds resilience instead of fragility. This shift does not require changing the external world, but upgrading the internal filter. When you train yourself to ask empowering questions in emotional moments, the brain begins forming new pathways. Instead of asking why something is happening against you, you begin asking how it is shaping you. That subtle shift rewires emotional patterns and builds inner authority over time. Emotional freedom begins the moment you stop outsourcing meaning to circumstance. When you realize that interpretation is a choice, you stop being a prisoner of events and start becoming the author of your responses. Life continues to deliver uncertainty, discomfort, and unpredictability, but your internal stability grows because meaning is no longer automatic. You begin observing before absorbing, questioning before reacting, choosing before collapsing. The power dynamic quietly reverses. Instead of chasing control over the world, you build control over perception. That inner shift creates calm in chaos and clarity in confusion. You stop fearing triggers because you understand there are invitations to examine meaning. Every emotional spike becomes a doorway into deeper self-awareness, where growth replaces reactivity and intentional interpretation replaces unconscious patterns that once dictated how you felt and who you believed yourself to be. In moments that once felt overwhelming, triggers are not random emotional explosions. They are signals pointing directly toward the parts of you that still feel unfinished. Every intense reaction carries information about a belief that has not yet evolved. When something small creates a big emotional wave, it is rarely about the moment itself. It is about the identity underneath that feels exposed. The discomfort is not chaos, it is clarity trying to surface. Triggers reveal the internal gaps between who you are today and who you are becoming. They highlight insecurities that logic cannot hide and fears that confidence cannot mask. In those heated moments, the polished version of yourself fades and the raw, unfiltered truth steps forward. That truth may feel uncomfortable, but it is honest. And honesty is the birthplace of growth because you cannot strengthen what you refuse to see or transform what you continue to deny within yourself. Every identity gap is built around a belief that never got challenged. Maybe you believe your worth depends on approval, so criticism feels like collapse. Maybe you tie value to achievement, so failure feels like erasure. Maybe you built strength around control, so uncertainty feels like danger. These gaps form silently over years, reinforced by repetition and rarely questioned deeply. Life then introduces triggers that expose these weak foundations. It does not do this to break you, but to reveal where reinforcement is needed. The emotional reaction becomes a spotlight shining directly on fragile areas within the self. Instead of seeing triggers as enemies, they can be seen as diagnostic tools showing where internal alignment is missing, they unco. The difference between surface confidence and core security, exposing whether strength is rooted in truth or dependent on conditions that shift easily. When identity gaps remain unseen, they quietly shape behavior. People start avoiding environments that might expose insecurity. They stay small to stay safe. They silence ambition to avoid emotional risk. A person who fears rejection may never pursue meaningful opportunities. Someone who fears judgment may never express their real voice. Over time, life becomes smaller, not because of external limits, but because of internal gaps left unaddressed. Triggers then repeat in cycles, showing up in different situations, but carrying the same emotional signature. Different faces, same feeling, different moments, same reaction. This repetition is not coincidence, it is a pattern asking for awareness. Until identity gaps are acknowledged, triggers keep returning like echoes, each one offering another chance to confront what has been avoided and strengthen what has been neglected within the evolving self. Awareness transforms triggers from threats into teachers. The moment you stop asking why something hurt and start asking what it revealed, the entire experience shifts. Instead of drowning in emotion, you begin studying it, you notice the beliefs hiding beneath the reaction, you observe the patterns that repeat, you recognize how certain situations activate the same internal narratives. This level of awareness creates distance between you and the trigger, and in that distance, growth begins. You stop identifying with the reaction and start analyzing the root. That analysis builds emotional intelligence, allowing you to respond with intention instead of impulse. The trigger loses its power to define you because you are now using it as data. You are no longer controlled by emotional spikes, but guided by the insight they profit. About where inner development is calling you forward. Closing identity gaps requires courage because it demands responsibility. It asks you to stop blaming situations and start refining self-perception. It requires rewriting beliefs that once felt permanent and replacing them with stronger foundations built through awareness and discipline. Each trigger becomes an opportunity to reinforce identity from within, rather than seeking validation from outside. Confidence begins shifting from performance to presence. Security starts coming from self-trust instead of circumstances. The more gaps you close, the less the world shakes you. Situations that once felt overwhelming start feeling manageable because your identity is no longer fragile. You begin carrying a deeper stability that is not dependent on outcomes, opinions, or temporary wins. And the emotional volatility that once controlled your reactions slowly transforms into grounded strength built from understanding yourself at a level most people never explore deeply. Most people move through life reacting instead of responding, and that single difference quietly determines the quality of their power. A reaction is instant, emotional, and unconscious. It is driven by impulse, shaped by past wounds, and fueled by unexamined beliefs. A response, on the other hand, is intentional, grounded, and chosen. It comes from awareness rather than emotion. The gap between those two states may only be a few seconds, but inside that space lives the difference between chaos and control. When something unexpected happens, the nervous system surges, emotions rise, and the mind rushes to protect itself. That is the birthplace of reaction. But when you learn to pause, breathe, and observe before acting, you step into the realm of response. That shift may look small from the outside, yet internally it marks the moment you stop being are, fueled by circumstances, and start directing your own state. Reactions are loud because they are automatic. They demand expression without permission and create consequences without reflection. An angry word, a defensive tone, a rash decision made in seconds can reshape relationships and opportunities in ways that linger for years. Reaction feels powerful in the moment because it releases emotional pressure instantly. It gives the illusion of control while quietly surrendering real control. Most people confuse intensity with strength, believing that quick expression equals authenticity. But raw expression without awareness often reveals vulnerability, not power. Reaction hands authority to the external world, allowing people, situations, and outcomes to dictate emotional direction. When you react, you become predictable. Your patterns become visible. And anything predictable can be manipulated by pressure, provocation, or fear that knows exactly which emotional buttons will trigger immediate, unfiltered responses. Response is quieter but infinitely stronger. It begins with space. A brief pause that interrupts emotional momentum and introduces awareness into the moment. In that pause, you observe instead of absorbing. You notice the emotion without becoming it. This creates a powerful separation between stimulus and action. Instead of being dragged by the moment, you begin shaping it. A response is not about suppressing emotion, but about directing it. It allows clarity to sit beside feeling, giving wisdom a seat at the table before action is taken. That presence transforms how situations unfold. Words become measured, decisions become aligned, energy becomes steady. People who respond instead of react carry a grounded confidence that others can feel immediately. Their calm is not passivity, but precision, showing that real strength is not loud, but deeply controlled and intentionally expressed. Power grows wherever awareness expands. The more conscious you become of your internal patterns, the more influence you gain over your external life. You begin noticing the early signals of reaction before they take over. A tightening chest, a racing thought, a sudden urge to prove or defend. These signals become invitations to slow down rather than speed up. With practice, you start stretching the space between trigger and action. That space becomes your training ground. Every time you choose awareness over impulse, you strengthen emotional discipline. Over time, this discipline compounds. Situations that once pulled you into chaos start meeting a different version of you, a version that is harder to provoke, harder to shake, and harder to control. Emotional mastery is built not through grand moments, but through repeated decisions to stay present when pressure rises and intensity tries to hijack clarity. True power is not measured by how strongly you feel, but by how consciously you choose. Anyone can react when emotions spike, but only a disciplined mind can remain steady in the middle of pressure. Response transforms energy into direction. It turns emotional waves into focused momentum instead of scattered impact. When you live from response, you stop leaking energy into regret and start investing it into intention. Your words carry weight because they are chosen. Your actions carry influence because they are aligned. Your presence becomes stable even when environments are unpredictable. This level of control reshapes identity from reactive to deliberate, from impulsive to intentional, from easily shaken to deeply rooted in awareness that allows you to move through uncertainty with a calm authority that does not need volume to prove strength. Most people see triggers as interruptions, emotional disruptions that ruin their peace and to throw them off balance. They view discomfort as something to escape, numb, or suppress. But when seen through a different lens, triggers stop looking like obstacles and start revealing themselves as tools. They are not accidents, they are invitations. Every emotional spike carries a message about growth waiting beneath the surface. The discomfort is not random chaos, but a doorway into transformation. When something triggers you, it exposes areas where resilience is still forming and awareness is still evolving. That moment becomes a crossroads where you can either shrink back into old patterns or step forward to a stronger identity. The trigger itself is neutral, but the meaning you attach to it shapes whether it becomes a source of suffering or a catalyst for evolution that begins reshaping how you engage with challenges and internal resistance. Transformation begins when you stop resisting discomfort and start examining it. Instead of asking why something hurts, you begin asking what it is teaching. That shift moves you from victimhood into ownership, Triggers often highlight the gap between comfort and growth, showing where you have outgrown old versions of yourself but have not yet stepped fully into the new one. They reveal emotional muscles that have not been trained yet and beliefs that have not been upgraded. In those intense moments, awareness becomes your greatest asset. By observing the reaction instead of drowning in it, you begin extracting lessons hidden inside the discomfort. That process turns emotional friction into self-discovery. You start recognizing patterns, noticing recurring themes, and understanding how certain triggers are pointing toward the same internal upgrade you have been postponing or avoiding for longer than you realized. Every trigger carries the potential to build strength if used intentionally. Pressure can develop patience. Criticism can sharpen clarity. Rejection can refine direction. The same experience that once created insecurity can later create resilience when approached with a different mindset. Transformation does not require perfect circumstances. It requires conscious engagement with imperfect moments. When you treat triggers as training instead of trauma, your relationship with adversity begins to change. You stop fearing discomfort because you recognize its developmental value. Each emotional challenge becomes a workout for the mind, strengthening your ability to stay grounded under pressure. Over time, the very experiences that once destabilized you begin reinforcing inner stability. The trigger does not disappear, but your capacity to handle it expands, creating a sense of growth that comes from realizing you are no longer the same person who once felt overwhelmed by similar storms. The power of triggers lies in their ability to accelerate self-awareness. Calm moments rarely expose hidden beliefs, but intense ones reveal everything instantly. They strip away surface composure and reveal the raw architecture of your inner world. In that exposure lies opportunity. When you analyze a trigger, you begin mapping your emotional landscape with precision. You identify where fear still lives, where validation is still craved, and where confidence is still conditional. This level of clarity is rare, yet triggers provide it freely if you are willing to observe instead of escape. Awareness gained in these moments becomes the foundation of intentional growth. You stop moving blindly through emotional patterns and start navigating with insight. The trigger transforms from an unpredictable enemy into a predictable guide that shows exactly where deeper self-mastery is waiting to be developed. Using triggers as tools requires courage because it demands presence in moments most people avoid. It asks you to stay with discomfort long enough to learn from it instead of rushing toward distraction. This practice builds emotional endurance, teaching you how to remain steady even when intensity rises. Over time, a subtle shift occurs. You stop dreading emotional spikes and start recognizing them as signals of expansion. The fear of being shaken begins to fade because you trust your ability to grow through whatever surfaces. Transformation stops feeling distant and starts feeling active, unfolding in real time through lived experiences. Each trigger becomes a stepping stone, shaping patience, strengthening clarity, and deepening resilience in ways that comfort never could, gradually forming an identity that is forged through conscious growth rather than accidental survival. Most people chase freedom in the external world, believing it lives in money, status, or independence from responsibility. They imagine freedom as the ability to do whatever they want, whenever they want. But real freedom is not external. It is internal. It is the ability to remain steady when life becomes unpredictable. Emotional control is the foundation of that freedom because it determines whether you are governed by circumstances or guided by intention. When emotions are unstable, even success feels fragile. A single setback can shake confidence, a single opinion can disrupt peace, and a single loss can dismantle clarity. Without emotional control, external achievements cannot create lasting stability. True freedom begins when your internal state is no longer hostage to external volatility, when calm becomes something you generate rather than something you wait for the world to provide in rare and temporary moments. Emotional control does not mean suppressing feelings or becoming cold and detached. It means understanding emotions deeply enough that they no longer dominate your decisive. It is the ability to feel anger without becoming destructive, to feel fear without becoming paralyzed, and to feel pressure without losing direction. This kind of mastery requires awareness because emotions move fast and often bypass logic. When you learn to observe them instead of instantly acting on them, you create space between impulse and action. That space is where freedom lives. And that brief pause You reclaim authorship over your choices. You stop being dragged by emotional waves and start steering through them. Emotional control transforms intensity into insight, allowing you to use feelings as information rather than letting them dictate outcomes that you later regret or struggle to repair. The absence of emotional control creates invisible chains. People may appear successful on the outside, yet feel trapped inside their own reactions. A harsh comment ruins their day. A delay destroys their motivation. A disagreement shatters their confidence. These subtle dependencies quietly limit potential because life will always include friction. Without internal stability, every obstacle becomes heavier than it needs to be. Emotional volatility drains energy that could have been invested in growth. It turns temporary challenges into prolonged suffering. This is why many people feel stuck despite opportunity. They are not blocked by the world, but by their inability to regulate their internal state. Freedom cannot coexist with constant emotional turbulence because instability forces you to live in reaction mode, where life feels like something happening to you rather than something you are actively shaping with clarity. When emotional control develops, a profound shift takes place. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. You stop amplifying problems through unchecked reactions and start approaching them with grounded presence. This steadiness creates resilience that others can sense immediately. Your energy becomes less chaotic and more intentional. You begin making decisions from clarity instead of urgency, and that clarity compounds over time. Relationships improve because responses become thoughtful rather than reactive. Goals become attainable because focus stops collapsing under pressure. Emotional control turns consistency into a lifestyle, allowing you to move forward even when motivation fluctuates. The world may remain unpredictable, but your inner environment becomes reliable. That reliability becomes a quiet advantage, giving you the ability to operate with composure while others are distracted by emotional swings they have not yet learned to manage. Ultimate freedom is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of inner command. It is waking up knowing that no matter what unfolds, you can choose your response. It is carrying peace into chaos and clarity into confusion. Emotional control gives you the rare ability to remain centered when everything around you shifts. You no longer wait for perfect conditions to feel stable because stability comes from within. This inner authority changes how you experience life entirely. Challenges become navigable instead of threatening, uncertainty becomes tolerable instead of terrifying, and pressure becomes manageable instead of overwhelming. Emotional control does not remove storms, but it transforms how you stand within them, allowing you to move through complexity with a grounded confidence that comes from knowing your state is self-directed rather than circumstance dependent.